This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by the Seeker's Guide to Twisted Taverns, which is a new product for 5th edition, live on Kickstarter till March 6th.
The Seeker's Guide to Twisted Tavern includes 14 new tavern locations filled with crazy NPCs, exciting clues and mysteries to explore, as well as just a lot of fun and games and revelry to improve your games of Dungeons & Dragons.
Taverns have been a cornerstone of Dungeons & Dragons campaign, and I feel like we're overdue for a good pub crawl.
Some of our amazing friends are working on this project, including Logan from Runesmith here on YouTube, as well as Eldermancy and Ghostfire Games. So please check out the Kickstarter and see all the great stuff they're working on.
They have totally blown past all their funding goals and are adding on some amazing new features to the book as we speak. So check them out right at Kickstarter by following the links below.
And now, onto this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we're sharing our guide to choosing spells for your Sorcerer in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
Now, we're doing things a little bit differently this time, and Monty and I have each created a Sorcerer at level 5, 10, and 15, and decided which spells we would take at those levels for our loadout going into the game.
Yeah, I built a Dragon Soul Sorcerer, a very conventional blaster with a couple extra tricks up their sleeve.
And I built a Shadow Sorcerer modeled after Sebastian Crow from Season 1 of our Dungeons of Drakkenheim campaign, who focuses a little bit more on battlefield control and utility.
Now, the reason why we've done things this way, as opposed to simply ranking the spells for the Sorcerer, is that the Sorcerer is an exercise in how to make a lot from a little. You have a very limited selection of spells, which is also why we haven't chosen the new Tasha's subclasses or the Divine Soul for this episode. We really wanted to focus in on how do you make the most of your limited spell selection. And it really is important when you're making a Sorcerer to think about what your meta magic is and what your spells are, and pair all of those together in a big picture sort of way. You can take the best spells in the game with a Sorcerer and come out fine, but those might not jive perfectly with your meta magic or with each other. So sometimes with a Sorcerer, you don't always pick the best spell because you're trying to piece together the right combination of spells to achieve what you want to do with that character.
Another important factor about a sorcerer choosing their spells, since they get such a limited number, is choosing spells that you're going to get a lot of mileage out of. As your sorcerer levels up, you can drop some of your lesser spells to replace them with higher end spells, but which spells, even at lower levels, moving on to higher ones, are going to have the longevity of being consistently useful time and time again?
There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling.
So let's kick things off by looking at the 5th level sorcerers that Monty and I made. Monty, what did you pick for your 5th level loadout?
So again, I'm playing a Fire Dragon Soul Sorcerer. Very, very conventional. So of course I wanted to pick up a couple damage dealing spells and a couple that gave me some interesting utility. For my cantrips, I've got Firebolt, Ray of Frost. I want to have at least 2 elemental damage types. Mage Hand, Prestidigitation, Minor Illusion. For first level spells, I took Thunderwave and Chromatic Orb, which might seem interesting because I'm a Fire Dragon Soul, but we'll talk about that in a moment. My second level spells are Flaming Sphere, which was added to the Sorcerer spell list in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and Invisibility. And my third level spells are Fireball, naturally, and Haste, which I have two third level spells at 5th level because I retrained a lower level spell up to this. Overall, my goal with this character, I have Empowered Spell and Twin Spell as my core meta magics, but with this character, I would probably also take Meta Magic Adept really early and probably have Quicken Spell and Subtle Spell right away as well. My goal with this character was to have a couple good spells to concentrate on while I blast them with Firebolt, Fireball, and Chromatic Orb, which I'm usually going to fire as a fire spell unless I need to switch things out. The key combo that I really like with this character is that I've got Flaming Sphere, which I can concentrate on and move around as a bonus action, and Thunder Wave, which I can use to knock enemies into the Flaming Sphere to get more mileage out of that. Otherwise, I'll just keep the Flaming Sphere up, get the extra damage, get the extra little bit of control there, and throw Firebolts around for when I don't need to use Haste or Fireball as my third level spell slots. In my experience, Invisibility is an absolutely clutch spell, and I always take it with any character who I can, because I just find that a lot of Dungeon Masters aren't prepared to handle a character that has invisibility. So it usually throws them for a nice curveball.
Moving on to my 5th level Sorcerer, which was going for a little bit more of a utility and crowd control sort of vibe, although I did take a few combat-oriented spells because I think every caster needs to have a few things in their back pocket to bust out during intense situations. For my cantrips, I picked Firebolt, Mage Hand, Mending, Minor Illusion, and Prestidigitation. For 1st level, I have Burning Hands, Disguise Self, and Shield. For 2nd level, I have Enlarge Reduce, Web, and because I'm a Shadow Sorcerer, I also gain Darkness. For 3rd level, I have Fireball. With the cantrip selection, it's pretty much the bread and butter of any spellcaster that you have most of these. Firebolt is your go-to damage-dealing cantrip. There are other options in there, and really you can give or take that with any of the damage-dealing ones. But then things like Mage Hand, Minor Illusion, Prestidigitation, and Mending are all pretty useful in varied situations. So I find that little package just gives you a lot of things to play with, not just in combat, but in a lot of aspects of Dungeons and Dragons. With my 1st level spell choices, Disguise Self and Shield, and Burning Hands, Burning Hands, again, is your combat-oriented spell, but with Shield, this is a spell that is going to be clutch and useful from the 1st level all the way up to the last level of your campaign. Shield is endlessly useful, and Disguise Self, similarly, is endlessly useful. There's a lot of applications of a spell like Disguise Self, and you will see that I drop it later on, but for majority of the early play, Disguise Self has so many benefits. With my 2nd level spells, Enlarge, Reduce, and Web, again, we're looking for more control and utility. Web can just shut down a group of enemies or block a passage, or, again, a lot of utility as well as helping your allies in combat. If you can take a group of enemies and stick them in place, it gives everybody else in the combat a better chance of destroying those enemies faster. Then with Enlarge Reduce, not only is there a lot of utility and usefulness here, but it can be used in combat as well to some hilarious and great effects. And then of course at 3rd level, Fireball, because sometimes you just gotta blow things up. So when we look at both of the packages here, Monty and I both took similar cantrips and we both took Fireball.
It's very hard to justify leaving home without it, especially at level 5.
Yeah, once you have access to Fireball, especially when you first have access to Fireball, it is probably the best 3rd level spell that you can dish out as a spellcaster on the battlefield. There's a lot of utility and other useful options, but you'll see that we kind of look at those later on, where Fireball just out the gate, being able to blast a group of enemies, so good.
Yeah, there's lots of good lower level control spells. It's really tempting to pick up a lot of the control-y sort of 3rd level spells here, but Web is so good at this level of play as well. It really kind of fills the requirement for a battlefield control spell so well in just one spell.
Not only that, but the combo of being able to web a group of enemies, let your allies wail on them for a bit, and then you drop a fireball on them, and now not only do they take the fireball damage, they're all stuck there, but now also the webs catch on fire and they take additional damage. So there's a nice little 1-2 punch hidden in there.
I think, though, this really highlights with a sorcerer that you have to pick your utility. And you have to pick how you're going to be tricky. I went for invisibility. You went for Disguise Self. But I think another one that both of us could have had at these levels would have been Suggestion.
Yeah. Suggestion is a great spell, but again, the hardest part of the sorcerer is picking and choosing from your list of best spells and kind of deciding what's going to gel and what you need to fill in your own gaps. If you already have a few utility spells, you don't want to take too many. So you kind of have to find this balance.
As we move to level 10, I think that this is when the sorcerer is at their apex of their power. I think that it really brings home the versatility and the raw strength that the sorcerer gets by having lots of meta magic options and lots of great spells to transform with that meta magic. So for my 10th level sorcerer, I kept most of my cantrips the same. I added another damage dealing cantrip to the list. I personally went with Chill Touch, but you could pretty much go with anything. Again, it's just nice to have that smorgasbord of options. My first level spells here ended up being Absorb Elements and Keeping Thunderwave. I went for my second level spells, Invisibility, and did pick up Suggestion here. My third level spells are Counterspell, Haste, and Fireball. Sticking with the good old reliables there. Yeah. And my fourth level spells are Dimension Door, Wall of Fire, and Polymorph. And for my fifth level spell, I picked Hold Monster. So that's 11 spells in total known. And overall with this package, I wanted to just evolve and refine what I started at level 5. By and large, I expect by this level of play, depending on my party, my go-to concentration spell is going to be a Twinned Haste. It's really hard to beat that for supporting your party, but also adding to your damage output. That said, there might be opportunities for me to drop a Wall of Fire and start knocking enemies into it with Thunderwave. And it's super important to have Counterspell in the party somewhere. And I want to also be able to have those really clutch abilities to bring spells like Dimension Door, Polymorph, Invisibility, and Suggestion into play, and sometimes you can end an encounter with Hold Monster. So all those are in play. I ended up adding to my meta magic by putting Heightened Spell into the mix of my meta magics. I might be tempted to go with one of the new Tasha's options here, such as the Transmuted spell to transform my Fireball. But really, in a combat encounter where my sorcerer is going to be encountering enemies that are resistant or immune to fire damage, I'm probably going to rely more on Haste, Polymorph, Dimension Door, and my other sort of trickier options like Hold Monster, rather than worrying about blasting them. And I'll let my party members be the ones responsible for dealing the damage there.
Brilliant list of spells. We actually do have a bit of overlap, but I think that's to be expected with us. Let's take a look at my 10th level sorcerer. For cantrips, I picked up Mold Earth. At first level, I have Disguise Self and Shield still remaining. At second level, the Darkness from my Shadow Sorcerer, but also now I have Invisibility, Tasha's Mind Whip, and Web. At third level, there's Counterspell, Haste, and Hypnotic Pattern. At fourth level, I have Banishment and Polymorph. And at fifth level, I have Animate Objects. My choice of Mold Earth for my cantrip is actually one of these varied elemental options that are now presented as cantrips, and I think they're all relatively useful. You need to kind of think of the campaign you're playing in. I find that everywhere you go, there's loose earth, so Mold Earth is usually a pretty good choice and has some really useful applications. I stuck with Disguise Self and Shield because, again, these scale really well. No matter how high your level of play is, Shield and Disguise Self are useful. With second level, I picked up Invisibility and Tasha's Mind Whip and kept Web. The reason for this is, as Monty said, Invisibility has so many applications, and not even just for yourself, but turning the rogue in your party invisible just is amazing. Tasha's Mind Whip I picked up because, first of all, it's a new spell, it's a brilliant spell, and it actually scales really well. Upcasting Tasha's Mind Whip to hit multiple targets can be devastating for a combat encounter. When we move on to third level, you need to have Counterspell, like you said. But I picked up Hypnotic Pattern because this spell for me is both battlefield control, but also combat ending. You can undo an entire combat encounter with a few bad saves against your Hypnotic Pattern, and now everybody's just standing there drooling, and you get to either walk away or finish the encounter. So then when we move on to our fourth level spells, similarly, the combat ending spells, I think of Banishment is just one of those clutch situations that if you're fighting a big scary monster, the bigger and scarier the monster, the lower their charisma usually. And that means that you can kind of diverge away from a combat encounter simply by nailing a banishment. And if you have something like Heightened Spell, you're going to be able to knock that out of the park like you did to me. So it's a really great spell to have in your back pocket, as well as Polymorph, which I think we can't even argue is one of our favorite spells in the game. And then I picked Animate Objects as my top spell here because, yeah, it's just outstanding. And the amount of damage that you can deal with it and the amount of other applications it could have are endless. So I'm trying to focus not so much just on dealing damage, but how can I create situations that amplify the game in meaningful ways in or out of combat.
I think this really shows how, as a sorcerer, you really have to look at the spells that have multi-purpose function and have clear and reliable functionality behind them as well. You can count on Animate Objects to do its thing. You can count on Polymorph to do its thing. Counterspell is a lifesaver. And these spells have so many weird and creative applications in so many different situations. Because, yeah, you can use invisibility to set up an ambush, but you can use invisibility to escape. You can use invisibility as a combat trick. You can use invisibility to explore or scout a dungeon. By similar token, Dimension Door works the same way. And Animate Objects is just open to so much creativity, or you can just beat people up with it. And I think with those kind of spells, that's why you have to kind of avoid those spells like Crown of Madness or Witch Bolt, because they're just so narrow with the Sorcerer.
Our overlap was Polymorph, Haste, and Counterspell, which I think is a statement that we're making there, that those are three of the best spells in the game and should be highly considered for any spellcaster that they're available to.
Polymorph is an oppressively powerful spell. It has so much utility, and the fact that you can twin it is glorious.
And that's the thing, with Polymorph and Haste, both are twinnable, which both you and I love the twin spell meta magic. It's something that we both take. And really, twin hasting your Gloomstalker Ranger and your Oath of Vengeance Paladin in your party is going to end any combat, and they get to pretend that they're taking all the credit, but really it was you who made that happen. So that's the beauty of twinning Haste.
Yeah, and you can do crazy things like polymorph two of your party members into giant eagles so you can all fly away. Polymorph is so much of a Swiss Army knife spell. It's borderline a mistake to not take it as a sorcerer, because it is a combat tool. Yes, you can turn into a T-Rex or a giant ape and fight, but it's all the non-combat applications in exploration that Polymorph brings to the table that really are where the secret power of the spell lies. So by the time my sorcerer has reached 15th level, I have dragon wings now. So I'm really tempted to trade out one of my first level spells for Featherfall in case I get knocked prone. So I have that and Absorb Elements. I'm keeping Invisibility and Suggestion for second level spells. And I'm keeping Fireball, Haste, and Counterspell. Haste will always be useful for you. Fireball, you can upcast it for more damage. Counterspell is ubiquitous. By the similar token, I'm keeping Dimension Door and I'm keeping Polymorph, but I'm also pulling out of your playbook and grabbing Banishment. I'm really tempted to keep Wall of Fire, but I have a combo I'm going to rely on a little bit later that I think I'm going to use more often than Wall of Fire. At 5th level, I have Telekinesis, because I think Telekinesis is a cool utility. But then from here, I get into my super high level spells. I picked Mass Suggestion and Sunbeam for level 6 spells, and I took Teleport for my 7th level spell, and I did not take an 8th level spell.
Interesting.
I think the 8th level spells for sorcerers are kind of lacking, and I think that I'm going to be and Teleport is there to be an emergency if I need it. If someone else in the party can teleport, I probably even wouldn't take that. And I'm mostly going to be using my 6th, 7th, and 8th level spell slots to cast Mass Suggestion and Sunbeam, because Sunbeam is going to be my big blasty spell. I'm going to cast Sunbeam with Quicken Spell on my first round of combat, which will allow me to fire the Sunbeam twice. And then on subsequent rounds, I'll continue concentrating on the Sunbeam and then quickening Fireball to really load on the damage as needed. And if it's not a circumstance, if it's not a combat encounter where I want to do that, I'll probably rely on Twin Haste for my party members otherwise. And then that way I can just rely on all the other utility that I've amassed to that point. Mass Suggestion is also really important to this mix because Mass Suggestion affects up to 12 creatures. It doesn't require concentration, and you can use this in encounter-ending ways, like warning all your enemies that a bright light is going to be coming for you, and it would be a really good idea if they covered their eyes until it's all over. Fun tricks like that open up a lot of creativity with Mass Suggestion to use it as a battlefield control spell or to use it in tricky social interactions by casting it using Subtle Spell.
When we get to my 15th level Sorcerer, at first level I now only have Shield. All my first level spell slots are going to be used to protect myself. At second level, Tasha's Mind Whip and Web remain. At third level, we have Counterspell, Haste, and Hypnotic Pattern, all of which are still staples. Fourth level is still Banishment and Polymorph. Fifth level is Animate Objects, and now also Synaptic Static. At sixth level, we have Mental Prison. At seventh level, we have Reverse Gravity. And at eighth level, we have Incinerary Cloud. So really, most of my loadout stayed about the same, but then I picked up Synaptic Static, which for me is just a great upgraded version of what Fireball offers, but with added elements to it. And I really like Synaptic Static. I think it's one of the coolest damage-dealing spells, and it also targets intelligence, which I think more spells now do, but in the early edition, it didn't have a lot of things that impacted intelligence, and intelligence is a lot of big scary monsters dump stats, so you can do some really big damage with that. When we move on to the later options, Mental Prison is a 6th level spell. Being able to twin that and capture 2 enemies, it doesn't matter what enemy you're facing. If you can trap them in a mental prison, it is devastating. And being able to twin Mental Prison is even more devastating.
That intelligence saving throw and the damage rider attached to it is brutal too.
Yeah, it's such a great spell. Mental Prison is a great 6th level spell. When we look at our 7th level spell, again looking at battlefield control and sort of the utility elements, Reverse Gravity is just a ridiculous spell. Not only can you slam people into ceilings and do massive amounts of damage, we've talked about some of the implications of spell combos that you can pull off with Reverse Gravity, but there's a lot that you can do. And if there's not much you can do in the current situation, you can still take an entire group of enemies, send them up into the air, and walk away while they just float up there. So there's a lot of value in a spell like Reverse Gravity, and no matter the environment you're in, it's going to have useful applications. I'm actually a little interested in changing my option for my 8th level spell, because something that I keep forgetting about is that Sunbeam, right? Yeah. Sunbeam allows you to cast the spell, and then as an action on your turn, fire another beam. It's not casting another spell. Something that I struggle with is finding good uses of Quicken Spell. It's a really valuable meta magic, but you need to know when to use it. And Sunbeam is actually, in my opinion, a better choice than Incinerary Cloud.
I agree.
Incinerary Cloud was my choice because I thought, I should pick an 8th level spell to advertise. And Incinerary Cloud is a great damage dealing spell, but it's not as great as quickening Sunbeam, being able to quicken it so now it's cast as a bonus action, and then using your action to fire another beam. And now with Quicken Spell, being able to use your action, again, not casting a new spell, means that you can quicken all the other spells that aren't concentration and continue to use them. So I actually think that I would trade out Incinerary Cloud for Sunbeam and take a note from you on that. But if you are looking for an 8th level spell, unfortunately the Sorcerer doesn't have a lot of great option. Incinerary Cloud is a great way to pile on some damage in an area, but you might want to check out the Sunbeam Quicken Spell combo.
Yeah, it works really, really effectively, and Telekinesis works on the same way as well. Telekinesis gives you another action that you can use on subsequent turns to grab enemies, and so you can use that action while concentrating on Telekinesis and then cast another spell like Fireball or another spell that doesn't require your concentration, and that gives you something to do with Quicken Spell while you're using the main action of that spell. So Sunbeam, Telekinesis are all options like that. Whereas on the flip side, then you have something like Animate Objects, which you're controlling with a bonus action anyways. So your animated objects are running around as you fireball other enemies. We stopped at 15th level because beyond that, pretty much the only other spell is 9th level spells, which you're probably going to take Wish.
And if you're not taking Wish, really there's such a small selection of 9th level spells that it's your choice.
Yeah.
We're not really going to pick and choose favorites here. There are 9th level spells that you'll probably want in addition to Wish, but Wish is going to be your go-to.
Our goal here was to show some example sorcerer builds that looked at all the spells as a holistic package. It's really easy to say, well, what about this spell? What about this spell? Why don't you include this spell? But then you always have to think about, okay, what spell are you going to take out?
Things like Shield, Web, Polymorph, Haste, Fireball, these are all spells that no matter what level of play you're at, they're going to have useful implications. Even things like Disguise Self and Invisibility are going to be endlessly useful. And really, as you level up, your kind of damage dealing spells, I find, get upgraded. You're always looking for the most powerful damage dealing spell, but then keeping the ones that don't really get affected by what the enemies are going to do, but more are ways of buffing or changing the dynamic of your party or protecting yourself from situations at the table that arise time and time again.
Sleep is an amazing spell to have at level 1, but it doesn't scale well, and you want to get rid of it by higher levels of play with a sorcerer because it's just not going to pull its weight, and with such a small number of spells known, every one of your spells has to work overtime. When you're picking a spell as a sorcerer, you really want to think about, can I use the spell in more than one way? Is this spell reliable? Will I always be able to count on it to do what I want it to do? And what meta magic am I going to use with this spell? You ideally want the spell to have a good answer for all three of those things. But if it doesn't, you might want to reconsider it.
So this has been our guide to choosing spells for the Sorcerer in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Tell us about some of your favorite Sorcerer spell loadouts in the comments below.
We want to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters for making everything that we do here on the channel possible. If you enjoy the work that we create here on YouTube and elsewhere, please consider joining our Patreon community by following the links in the description below.
Also, our live play campaign Dungeons of Drakkenheim is coming to Kickstarter. We've partnered with Ghostfire Games to bring Dungeons of Drakkenheim to life as a 5th edition module. You can follow the links below to join the mailing list and get up-to-date information on all of the ongoings of the upcoming Kickstarter. And don't forget to check out our live play in the Worlds of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/dungeon_dudes. You can find all the previous episodes of that show right up over here.
And we have plenty more videos where we discuss the spells in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and those are all available right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.